The Middle East has not always been the fractured landscape of warring states, disputed borders, and ideological militias that define it today. For much of its history, the region existed under overarching structures of authority that, regardless of their flaws, imposed a kind of functional unity across vast and diverse populations. One of the earliest of empires was the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which in the 6th and 15th century BCE governed territories stretching from Anatolia to Egypt and across Mesopotamia to Central Asia, maintaining cohesion under a single imperial bureaucracy. Centuries later, the rise of Islam introduced a new form of unity. The early Islamic caliphates, beginning in the 7th century, fused political administration with religious legitimacy, and for a time ruled much of Arabia, the Levant, Persia, and North Africa as one civilizational sphere. This legacy of long term imperial cohesion was later inherited by the Ottoman Empire, which, from the early 16th century until the end of the First World War, governed the Arabs, Turks, Kurds, Armenians, Jews, and Persians through a centralized yet pluralistic system that prevented constant sectarian conflict. When this imperial structure finally collapsed in the early 20th century, it did not give way to organic self rule, but to external partition. The Middle East was carved up by the British and French administrations, who drew borders according to imperial strategy rather than historical, tribal, or religious realities. With little more than pen, paper, and maps, they divided and reassigned populations, creating future states such as Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Palestine, without consulting the people destined to live with them. The partition of historic Palestine, first into a mandate territory and later into competing national claims, created not merely a new state, but a permanent dispute over legitimacy. For a brief period in the mid 20th century, newly formed Arab nation states emerged as capable authoritarian regimes, maintaining internal cohesion through centralized power. Leaders such as Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, Hafiz al Assad in Syria, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and the Shah in Iran exercised tightly controlled rule that, however repressive, preserved territorial integrity. Some of these leaders even attempted to revive regional unity through something called Pan-Arabanism, leading to experiments like the United Arab Republic between Egypt and Syria. Yet, these post-colonial states did not fall by natural internal collapse. They were systematically weakened by external intervention. Western powers pursuing influence in the Cold War era engaged in coups, proxy army, sanctions, and invasions, not to stabilize the region, but to manipulate or replace local regimes for strategic advantage. In 1953, foreign intelligence services intervened directly in Iranian politics, aiding the removal of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The monarchy was restored with Western backing, but this externally engineered return destroyed its domestic legitimacy and contributed to the 1979 revolution, which replaced secular nationalism with a fundamentalist clerical regime consolidated in opposition to Western influence. In Iraq in 2003 and Libya in 2011, Western interventions dismantled central authority without providing a viable alternative, allowing militias and sectarian movements to take control. Across the Middle East, intervention did not eliminate tyranny. It shattered sovereignty without building stability. The consequence of this arc, imperial collapse, foreign partition, authoritarian consolidation, and external dismantling, is that the Middle East today is not simply a region in conflict. It is a region in which conflict has become structural. It is a system where no power is strong enough to enforce peace, and no institution is widely trusted enough to mediate it. Two conflicts illustrate this breakdown with exceptional clarity and persistence: the confrontation between Israel and Iran, and the struggle between Israel and Palestine through distinct, one a strategic rivalry between two states, the other a contest between a recognized state and a stateless people. Both arise from the unresolved history, contested legitimacy, and absent political order. The Israel-Iran conflict is not merely ideological, but a security dilemma born of revolution, foreign interference, and proxy warfare. The Israel-Palestine conflict, rooted in occupation, displacement, and competing claims to nationhood, remains frozen between statelessness and militarized sovereignty. These two conflicts are not isolated crises. They are expressions of the same systematic disorder, a region in which history has not been reconciled and force has become the default instrument of negotiation. Although Israel and Iran are often presented today as incomprehensible enemies, their relationship became as a pragmatic alignment anchored in compatible strategic interests rather than ideological affinity. Under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran recognized Israel de facto, sold it oil, and cooperated on intelligence and development projects. Israel, for its part, regarded Iran as a non-Arab counterweight to hostile Arab nationalism and a useful partner on the periphery of the Arab worlds. In Washington's regional architecture, this partnership meshed with a broader American strategy on relying on close regional clients rather than large US troop deployments, a pattern in which Israel increasingly served as a forward extension of American strategic power projection in the Levant and beyond. The 1979 Iranian Revolution transformed the strategic symmetry into ideological antagonism. The monarchy's external backed restoration in 1953 had long corroded its domestic legitimacy. When it finally fell, the revolutionary leadership recasted Iran's identity in explicit opposition to Western influence and to Israel's legitimacy, elevating anti-Zionism into a central component of the new state political theology. For Israel, Iran's shift from pragmatic partner to ideologically motivated adversary altered the threat landscape from a conventional balance of power competition to a potential existence struggle with a revolutionary regime that framed the conflict in civilizational terms. In the decades that followed, this rivalry matured into a shadow war conducted across multiple domains. Israel adopted a doctrine of forward, often covert, preemption designed into disrupting Iran's regional entrenchment and to slow or complicate its nuclear advancements through targeted sabotage, deniable air operations, and cyber activities. These moves were justified domestically as necessary defensive measures, but also functioned to sustain an American-aligned regional military balance without direct U.S. intervention. Iran responded asymmetrically by building an extensive network of armed partners, most prominently Hezbollah in Lebanon, along with Palestinian factions and Shia militants in Syria and Iraq, creating a layered pressure point around Israel, ensuring that any strike on Iran risked escalation on multiple fronts. The result is a contest in which both sides export risk. Israel projects precision force outward to keep threats at a distance, while Iran projects influence inwards towards Israel borders. through allied non-state actors. What makes this case especially revealing is that both parties describe their posture as defensive, even as their methods normalize offense. Israeli officials frame preemption overseas assassinations and cross border strikes as necessary to avoid strategic surprise. Iranian officials present arms transfer, training, and financing for partners as a deterrent against Western encirclement and Israeli attack. In practice, each attempt to enhance security is read by the other as an escalation, requiring countermoves, producing a classic security dilemma in which deterrence fails, the action-reaction cycles becomes self-fueling. Because the rivalry is embedded in ideology, alliance politics, and nuclear latency, it bleeds easily across borders and into adjacent theaters: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Gaza, and the Red Sea, turning the Israel Iran confrontation from a bilateral dispute into an engineered regional instability. The Israel Iran rivalry thus crystallizes the larger regional pathology. In the absence of trusted institutions and agreed rules, both sides treat force as the only credible language, and both outsource risk onto weaker neighbors. Curbing this cycle requires reimposing rules on the use of force, restoring predictability to nuclear behavior on both sides of the rivalry, and building real-time channels to keep a shadow war from becoming a regional cataclysm. Thank you very much for watching this video. We will publish part 2 soon. Thank you.